Hello, I'm Sam Buchanan, CEO of the IMAA, and you're listening to the podcast series Audio 101, proudly coming from Acast Studios. Audio 101 is one chapter of our 8-part media series designed to collectively raise the capabilities of the Australian media industry. In this podcast, Audio 101, you're going to hear from media experts who are well versed in audio. Joe Dick, Chief Commercial Officer at Commercial Radio Australia, Sarah Melrose, Managing Director of Admatic, Lisa Christie, General Manager of Pearman Media, and David Moody, Head of Planning of BCM Group. Ahead, we're going to discuss the channel, planning, strategies of audio measurement, considerations and tips on how to build a successful audio campaign. Sit back and enjoy this episode. Firstly, welcome all of our amazing panellists, Joe, Sarah, Lisa, Dave, to today's conversation. What I will start by is going around the room and getting everyone to tell how they started in their job and what they do. Lisa.
Well, I actually started 1,001 years ago in North Sydney at an agency called Ogilvy & Mather as media assistant, and pretty much in an industry that is so different to today. I would have been the token Australian to start with. I was in a department full of English expats that had moved over, and it was in the days when People Meters was just being brought in. And I was also one of only 2 females, which was also extremely unusual for the media industry back in the 80s. There was a lot of men and consequently Ogilvy was the place people wanted to come to visit.
Sarah.
My journey into media was pretty chronological. I did my degree in marketing in the UK and then fell straight into the agency world. And that's where I spent the last 13 years in both agencies, big and small. And I moved to Australia about 7 years ago, having worked for Group M in the UK and moved over with another agency here. And my background is traditionally in programmatic, but now I'm the managing partner of Admatic, an independent leading media agency in Australia.
Joe.
Right. Well, I started my career quite some time ago, maybe 1,002 years ago. My first job was a little media assistant at Channel 9. Back in the days when they were in Willoughby, there was a marble floor. I worked in the advertising department and it was great fun, really good fun. From there, I went on to work in agencies and up until when I started CRA, that's where I had been. So my previous job was working at Omnicom and I was there for 18 years, so quite some time. And I was heading up the outdoor and audio division there. Been at CRA for the last 18 months and it's fantastic.
Dave.
So I started in advertising. I started back in the day working across Facebook and Google ads, back when you could only really do a handful of things on Google and you couldn't buy an ad on Facebook, building up communities and kind of worked my way through when I started at BCM from a digital strategy standpoint, beginning with programmatic and understanding how that all works and really integrating media and channel and message all together at a fully integrated agency, kind of working how the message and channel combine, that side of things, really working closely with creatives, but closely with media as well to drive our results.
Fantastic. Guys, we're going to open up today's conversation and I'll probably start off with Joe, but I want to understand the evolution of the channel. What is audio and where is it going?
So audio is obviously anything that you can listen to and it's been around for a long time, right? And people have had it as part of their daily lives. That hasn't changed. In fact, what really has changed is the fact that audio now is much more mobile. So when you think about it, it used to be something that was listened to in the home. These days, obviously it's in all of the cars. It is on smart speakers, it's on mobile phones, it's on desktops. So the biggest evolution, the biggest change for audio that's taken place, that is continuing to take place really, is the fact that it's so much more mobile these days. And that is only going to continue to grow.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think from my perspective, audio is really interesting because, as you say, the mobile nature of it opens up a world of opportunity because it really, from a media perspective and the way that media can really influence the way that we think about branding, it's a really clever way to connect every single piece of comms that we have together, whether it's through mobile media channels, mobile channels and audio channels, or simply using audio within your traditional video spots and things like that to make sure that you've actually got a consistent link through everything that you run. And I think from that perspective, it's really underutilized and we're only really beginning to see in the last few years brands really catching on to that, which is exciting.
Lisa.
I definitely concur with that. I think it's also coming into its own again. It had areas where radio, particularly and audio now, is a very personal medium. It's something that you're consuming one-to-one. you're leaning into it. You're actually paying attention to what's being said, what's being played in terms of music. But it also does have a bit of credibility that potentially the big wave of all these new channels that exist, and pretty much anything can now be a channel, doesn't mean it has the same trust, doesn't mean it has the same reputation. Whereas particularly with regional radio and radio stations wherein they're market specific, you end up with, they know their local market, they know their people, they know what's going on in your hometown. That particularly has probably overtaken press in terms of having that environment where people trust it and listen in for things that are relevant. The bushfires we've seen and the disasters that have happened over the last couple of years have probably also increased radio's listening. People can still dial into that and they haven't lost a signal. They can still listen and get emergency information. So I think it's actually about to probably have a big resurgence.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think building on from what everyone said, but perhaps Joe in particular, in terms of the growth of mobile listening across audio, it's been huge in the past 5 years. But interestingly, that hasn't actually outstripped the demand for broadcast radio. So broadcast radio media investment has actually remained stable year on year for the past 5 years. Yet investment in streaming audio has actually increased by 40%, and podcasts in terms of media investment have increased by over 600% since 2016, according to the IAB. So whilst there's a huge growth and explosion in mobile audio, and particularly in podcasts, which I guess is partly thanks to the lockdowns of the past few years, we've had a lot more listening time available. It hasn't actually come at the cost of broadcast radio. We're actually just consuming more audio as a whole.
Oh, awesome. Dave, from your perspective, when should audio be used as a channel? And, what sort of businesses and brands does it work best for?
Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity with audio across almost every brief. When you think about the opportunity you've got, as was discussed before, it's a really intimate channel. You're right in somebody's ears in many cases if you've got the AirPods in. And I think really from that perspective, whether it's audio through radio, getting kind of the influence and the kind of rub off that you get from things like a live read or announcer read, all the way through to, podcasting, aligning into content, aligning into interests, whether it's creating something from scratch and actually building up a channel through audio, like, for example, with podcasts and using that as a media opportunity. It's intimate and people seek out their interests. We're not interrupting people necessarily with audio like we are with other channels, because they're going to podcasting to connect with their favorite creators or their favorite shows. So kind of being in those environments in particular, I think it's a great opportunity to align to capture people's attention.
Lisa?
There's actually some really, really lovely research that came out last year showing Peter Pince's company NeuroInsights, where they actually map the brain and follow how people interact with media. And interestingly, radio is one of the few that has an amazing cut through. It does shift. People stop and listen to particularly things like news updates or weather updates or traffic updates. The content is very personalised. I think it sort of reiterates what the panel have been saying, that you actually break through a bit of the clutter that maybe we have in a lot of the other mediums that we can choose from. But you can also geographically do that very well as well.
What brands do you think it works well for?
Probably any brand. It probably comes more down to who are we wanting to talk to and what are we wanting to convey. I think retail traditionally has loved radio and radio has loved it right back, because you can be very short and sharp. You can turn a message around very quickly. You can build a bit of excitement around what's going on in a short period of time. But generally all brands, the theatre of the mind takes a really good copywriter, takes a person to think about how to say that in a short, sharp moment in time. But I wouldn't think there's a brand where you would say you couldn't use radio.
Joe?
Yeah, I'd actually just like to echo what Lisa's saying there. It really has traditionally been used for retail, and it's a great vehicle to build your retail short-term solutions, etc. But we've just conducted some amplified intelligence research on attention, and that research showed that radio can have a brand uplift of 20%, which is really impressive. It's sitting right up there with the other branding building platforms. So for radio, it can do both the retail job, but also the brand building job.
Yeah, I'd agree with both those statements that actually any brand, any campaign can make audio work. Just have to plan smartly about how you best utilise audio. So as a media agency, we use Roy Morgan, for example, to find out which audiences are listening to which platform, whether that is regional radio and broadcast radio, whether that's streaming music and podcasts. We identify where they're actually listening to then fit the targeting into the audience. And secondly, we've spoken about sort of the ad format a little bit as well. But depending on who we're we're trying to target and talk to and the message that we're trying to convey, we may use a variety of different ad formats. So if the message is simple, for example, retail, we may use higher frequency of 15-second ads. For example, if the message is a lot more complex or needs a lot more explaining, such as home loans, and that purchase decision is a lot longer, then we may use 30 seconds or even host-read ads or live read ads, which feel a lot more native, either on broadcast radio or on podcast, to not interrupt that flow of speech, and actually becomes a lot more native to the actual content itself.
Lisa, next to you, I want to understand the considerations when planning and executing an audio campaign. Where do you start? What do you do?
It starts with two things. One would be, what's the role of the campaign? What are we trying to achieve? What are our business objectives, our media objectives? But secondly, who are we talking to? What do we know about those people? What do we know about their consumption of radio in particular? And is there an avenue in which we can come in and talk to those people and complement what they're doing, so that whilst we still have the cut through, it feels relevant to them? There's a number of different tools that can be used for that. I think radio over the years potentially maybe have struggled in some markets where there hasn't been audience data available, particularly in the smaller regional markets where they might run a survey once a year to see who's actually listening, but it's difficult to ascertain that in each of the smaller markets. But generally, where the bulk of the population lies, there's great data available, and we can look at everything from how long they're spending with radio, where they're listening to radio, where they're listening to other forms of audio, how are they doing that, how long are they doing it for, where there's overlap between other audiences. So we start to build a picture of how radio fits in with the other channels that we're using, but also how it fits in with the lives of the consumer. And one thing I'd say on the other channels, radio works very, very well as a complementary partner with, particularly online, as a follow-up of online, as a drive inquiry to online. You see a lovely rapport between people being in the car, hearing a sound, hearing radio, hearing an ad, getting out of the car, moving into a retail store or moving into what they're about to do, going into work onto a laptop and going online. So there's a lovely link between hearing something and then acting on it fairly quickly in the purchase cycle. It also works very, very well with outdoor, where you've got the broadcast of outdoor complementing, I'm in a car, I'm driving along, I see a billboard, and at the same time I'm hearing an ad. There's a nice synergy with that. So a lot of that sort of thinking goes into play up front, and then we would step into involving the audio media reps very early in that process. They know their station and their listeners better than anybody else. So how can we feed off that knowledge to make a better campaign? But it can be done very quickly. And I think we'll probably touch on that later. But a radio campaign is quite an easy campaign to turn around, and the deadlines are very short. The creative's fairly simple. There's not a lot of complexity in actually executing that campaign. The planning normally should work hand in hand with good copywriters and good creative teams. And we may also talk about this later on. The one thing where it can go potentially wrong is if you end up with a lot of the same radio voice announcers advertising the same products, and in some radio stations where you might have 6, 7, 8, 10 ads in an ad break, if it's all the same voiceover, that's probably not helping my client.
Probably not. How do you get around that?
A lot of it is briefing up front. We would normally encourage that creatively. We're having a creative department do that. If it's live reads, that's a different thing. That's actually the endorsement of the actual DJ, and it works very well in news talk. Maybe not as well in some of the more younger skewed stations where the reputation isn't the same, but we would normally brief in very early what we want the creative to be saying, how we think we need to speak to that particular audience, and then produce it.
It's all in the brief.
Yeah, very much so.
Sarah, I'm keen to understand the considerations when planning and executing an audio campaign.
Yeah, echoing on what we've just said in terms of speaking to our partners, we plan that each station, each channel actually resonates with our target audience, and that has strong affinity. I think one of the things that often overlook in audio that we do really well in other channels, particularly in programmatic display and video, is the contextual alignment. So particularly within digital audio and even broadcast radio, we can and should align our whatever we're advertising towards that content that's being talked about on that show. And with podcasts in particular, we can get really granular now. So rather than just the genre as a whole, for example, if the podcast is talking about nutrition, but you're a gym or an exercise advertiser, when they get to talking about exercise specifically in that podcast, even though it's about nutrition as a whole, you can actually insert your ad at that time when they're talking about exercise specifically. So we've got really granular contextual targeting now available in podcasts. And that's something that we often, I say, overlook in audio versus other channels. So we try and align, as we would in other channels, the message towards the context in addition to the audience, and also what is the message we're actually trying to convey, what are they actually consuming when they're listening to this audio ad, and make sure they're in the right frame of mind and the right moment, as we kind of learnt as 101 marketing principles.
Joe?
Yeah, they're great tools and great sort of principles you look to use to plan a campaign from the start, and they're great examples. Add another one in there, and it's something that we launched at CRA mid last year, and it was in response to people asking, what is the incremental reach of the different audio platforms? So we approached Nielsen, who've got a CMV tool with really rich data, and extracted that data and put it into the podcast planning tool that's available on the CRO website at no charge. So you can look at it at a metro level, at a national level, or at a regional level, and look at it by demographic or by different categories that we got in there. Choose the different audio formats, and then look at the incremental reach that each of those formats deliver based on the demographic that you've chosen. It's super simple, but again, it goes back to answering that question: what are the different roles of the different platforms in audio, and how is the reach built amongst those different platforms? Another tool that we've worked on for the last couple of years with Triton Digital is the Australian Podcast Ranker. There was a huge amount of, interest and thirst for wanting to understand more about podcasting. What are the numbers? What are the top podcasts available out there? Who do I go and talk to about what to buy on podcasts? So the Podcast Ranker was developed by Triton Digital to rank the top performing podcasts by listening, but also by downloads. Listening is the metric that we generally consider to be the most robust. It's who has actually listened to the podcast. The ranker shows you by category, by publisher, by individual podcast, what the top podcasts are. But it's not always about the top podcasts. You might be wanting to do a podcast around a certain genre. So therefore, you're interested in what sort of genres are out there that I should be interested in podcasting. Again, that was in response to the market needing some solutions around podcast advertising.
Awesome. Dave?
Yeah, I think it's some really great points. From our point of view and from my point of view, the way when we begin planning with this, it begins for me with looking at the journey, the consumer journey, and the role that channel plays within that. So, of course, things like profiling and efficiencies and over-indexing is really key. But one thing that I really love and an approach that I like to take is looking at what we can do to amplify the idea and making sure the message really connects within the channel. Is there an opportunity to make the media the idea, not just the idea the idea? So looking at things like moments and environments and context, and how can we play into that to make sure that we're delivering something that's going to connect and stand out? Because at the end of the day, we're delivering, off the same kind of profiling, the same kind of plans. The thing that makes us stand out from a media planning perspective is the creativity that we put into planning the media and what we can do to get those disproportionate gains that might come from finding that little moment that might be, the moment in the commute and connecting the idea to that, or understanding the context of earbuds right in your ears, and how can we play into that to make sure that the media and the message and the audience are completely aligned, so that we kind of people take notice for us, really. So it's really planning along that side of things, not ignoring all of the other metrics that come along with planning, but kind of thinking a bit broader with the creative thought as well.
And Dave, whilst we're on that, what tools do you use to monitor for pre and post as well? What's in your toolbox?
In terms of planning to begin with, the similar kind of tools, I suppose, that we would all have access to. So looking at things like Roy Morgan, Global Web Index being a big one as well, media owner intel as well. As was mentioned before, nobody knows their channel and their audience like the media owners. There's always some great intel there. And using that alongside, any planning that we've done, any research that we've done with consumers themselves in the planning phase. And then post, it's working with the media companies that we partner with, and particularly the opportunity with programmatic channels now as well, to look at uplift studies and attention studies and really have a fairly measured, almost scientific approach to what is it we want to learn out of this and what can we build on for next time. If the investment level's there, then we might as well be trying things and pushing the boundaries to gain the learnings, not just for the client, but for the platforms that we work with as well, because that's where, for me, the really interesting stuff begins to take shape.
Joe, swinging it back around to you, what sort of tools do you recommend looking at or using, as a media planner buyer?
Oh, look, all the ones that have been discussed today are definitely up there. The only other one I would suggest is ERAM, which shows you where your audiences are. So ERAM is owned by Lansbury & James, which is a Nielsen tool now. And that product really allows the user to understand more about the target they're looking to reach. So what stations they're listening to, what time of days they're listening to the radio. So you can really start to fine-tune what your schedule should look like, how many spots you're going to be putting in there, running a reach and frequency on that, what sort of the reach and frequency looks like when you're adding another station. All those sort of runs that you're doing is formulating the best possible approach you're putting together to solve your advertising campaign.
Could I actually add one which complements both of what you're saying? 2 examples of creatively placing an ad at a certain time of day. I worked on a campaign for work cover, which was all about work safety and talking to primarily tradies around doing early shifts and being careful about their work. Through all that sort of analysis that we've all talked about, we ended up running radio at 2:30, 3:30, 4:30 in the morning, because it was as people were heading into their early shift or coming home from their graveyard shift. The way the radio systems work, that would be counted as a midnight to dawn freebie spot that nobody wants to go near, yet the audience were actively listening at that time. It's just an example of where, by understanding your audience, understanding when that's going to have the most poignant effect, that was a negotiation about, well, of course we won't pay for the spots because they're at 3 a.m. and you think they're worthless. But the cut through of that was probably stronger than, paying the premium to be in breakfast. The other example I'd use is a time of day analysis, minute by minute analysis. And it's if you want to get really geeky with the numbers and start to really look down into a granular level. Parents with children, mums doing the school drop off. There's a wonderful gentleman that used to work at ARN who bothered to do the analysis down to minute by minute for me. And we found that there was a spike at between, I think it was 2:30 and 2:45 p.m. when mums were sitting in the car outside school. That again is in an afternoon session that didn't have a premium applied to it, but there was a spike of 25 to 30% listening. It went up just in that 5-minute increment. It's something where the systems, aren't necessarily they're looking at a quarter-hour average, but we wanted to book that particular 5-minute slot. You can be as anally retentive as that.
I think whilst we can measure and report on delivery and reach and frequency through a variety of tools we've just sort of gone through, one of the bigger challenges with digital audio, whether that's streaming or downloads, is the ability to track the effectiveness and measurement. So as digital advertisers, we get very hung up on the measurement because we can track everything. So within search, Facebook, display, we can track what's happened on the website, conversions, etc. And so we expect the same outcome from digital audio often because it's bought in the same way and it's bought programmatically. So that becomes a bit of a challenge sometimes, that marketers can't see the outcomes or the effectiveness straight off the back of audio. But there are things that we can do moving forwards and that have emerged in the past year, such as pod sites, which allows us to actually track the effectiveness of ads, who's actually landed on your website and who they are, which previously we were not able to do at all. And we can also test things such as A/B testing, whether that's again in the morning, certain times of day, or we can do location targeting. So if we're only serving digital ads in certain postcodes versus other postcodes, and look at the relative site traffic uplift in those areas as an indication of success. And the other sort of tactic we can try as well in terms of trying to just get a little bit more measurement of effectiveness is using particular call to actions or key phrases in your ad. So for example, if you said, ask someone to search for Discover IMAA today in your ad, and people then start searching for that phrase and you see that spike uplift in that phrase, you can then attribute that back to your audio ad because they wouldn't have searched for that phrase otherwise. So there are tactical things we can do for digital audio to try and improve the measurement.
Talking about a campaign, I always look at, because I'm a simple man, I always look at a campaign like making a cake. You got your eggs, you got your flour, you got your sugar, and you build it all together. If you're missing one ingredient, and I always throw in radio when I was on the tools. Lisa, I'll start with you. Where do you use it in your funnel? Is it consideration at the top? Is it conversion at the bottom? How do you use radio and audio?
As we discussed earlier, it sort of goes all the way through the funnel, and even to the point of at the end of the funnel and back into loyalty and back up into trialing again. So it can be a brand metric, definitely. One of the things we haven't touched on yet is mnemonics and jingles. And there's many, many, many examples of the effectiveness. When my daughter was 6 or 7, she could off by heart sing half the ads on radio. She knew the phone numbers of all the different, can't even think of them now, but would literally know the jingle and the phone number to call. And I think that's always a really good example of she was paying attention and she heard it enough on a daily basis. So I think it can be brand, it can be theatre of the mind, it can go all the way down to getting you to switch, getting you closest to the point of purchase, particularly in retail when you're literally outside the front of the store and you're hearing an ad. But then it can also, in a podcast sense, be more about a long-term thinking channel as well. So I think some of the guys have touched on the environment and whether or not you feel like you belong. The matching of if you're hearing it in your radio station or your podcast, I think there's a sense of inbuilt loyalty there as well that probably helps with the repurchase side of things. So yeah, all the way through.
I think 2 or 3 years ago, it would have firmly sat at the top of the funnel for a lot of advertisers, and it wouldn't have made the bottom of the funnel because it just wasn't sort of part of that remit of thinking it doesn't drive performance. I can't track if someone's made a sale out of the back of a podcast or a radio. That said, that has definitely changed in the last 2 or 3 years, particularly with the targeting options we've obviously spoken about and the measurement that we can now track. In addition, across digital audio, we can also, in some cases, use first-party data, which that's really recent addition. We've never been able to do that before. So we can begin to build that purchase loyalty and that frequency to existing customers to upsell and cross-sell, for example. So that does become a lot more playing in the bottom of the funnel than it has been before.
Joe.
Yeah, look, it definitely has moved from where it stood way back when, just providing that retail solution. And as audio has really gone through a massive evolution, it just shows you those changes are continuing to happen. So this time next year, there'll be even more targeting capabilities. It's moved a long way so quickly already. So you'd never have thought before that you could offer any attribution metrics to radio. Hello? Digital streaming, it's all over it. Podcasting, same deal. So the fact that you can now have a broadcast campaign, but also overlay targeting means that it really can play in all parts of the funnel. So it's really impressive.
Sarah.
The addition of other creative services as well actually helps audio play in the bottom of the funnel. So we can begin to use close to dynamic ads. So 1 million ads through digital audio and podcast actually allows you to tailor each ad depending on a multitude of factors, time of day, location, etc. So you can actually really tailor that ad to the user depending on them as a person, rather than having one message, which is traditional broadcast. You can actually create multiple variations of the same ad to be a lot more tailored and therefore drive that lower funnel performance.
Dave, where does it fit in the funnel?
So I think that it's really interesting, kind of gone are the days of the big shouty voice yelling at you that the accountant's gone crazy and they've ordered too many cars and everything must go. I kind of think back to my childhood. The other end of the scale of branding, I think it's got such a huge opportunity to create a lasting impression. And we heard just now about, children being able to sing the phone numbers. I still remember who doesn't remember the Loopmobile kid? Who doesn't remember those kind of ads that were all over radio and everywhere?
And your amazing National Tiles Brisbane man.
Yeah.
The voice of the voice.
That's right. Just the fact that sound is so efficient and the way in which we process sound allows it now to become this amazing branding tool. And we see it with things like Menulog, that you just have to say Menulog and you almost complete that little kind of jingle in your head. You think about audio branding, you think about and visualize in your head the Netflix logo. I defy you not to hear the din din. If you think about the 20th Century Fox logo, you can hear the horns playing, or the Intel logo. So audio at a branding level has a huge opportunity to connect, which when used through podcasting, through streaming, through any of those channels, differentiates you. If you've all got the same VO talent, then it's that little mnemonic or that device at a brand level that connects everything straight back to you, which is what we're here to do. And it obviously works well at the retail level as well.
Amazing. Joe, I'm going to start with you. When looking ahead at the future, what are you seeing from around the world in terms of trends and where are we heading with audio?
So look, I think the digital evolution is going to continue. It's going to only increase in terms of people listening to radio audio on their smartphones. So currently we've got about 25% of Australians listening to radio on their smartphones. So that is only going to increase. Same with smart speakers. So the where people are listening to radio is going to grow. The amount of time they're spending listening to radio on digital devices is only going to increase. So I think the way they're listening to radio is definitely going to be part of the future. There still will be the role for the transistor in the kitchen, but the reality is most homes now have a smart speaker. So that transistor in the kitchen probably will take a back seat and homes will now be saying, hey, Google, play Nova. And that's what's happening now. And more and more of that will happen in the future.
Sarah.
I think a couple of things. One is more detailed targeting. So like I mentioned previously, we can now use first-party data, which is a great advancement. I can only see that improving further in terms of tactical targeting. Improved measurements. So with apps like pod sites, we can actually track website visitation and other metrics that actually help drive and improve the effectiveness of audio and giving it more room at the bottom of the funnel, so therefore increased, investment. And better and more tailored ads. We've spoken a little bit about that already. But yeah, choosing the voice and the relevant sound for you and your brand is going to become more important, but also being able to tailor that at an individual level is going to drive greater efficiency.
Lisa.
I wonder, and I don't know the answer to this at all, But the prevalence of AI and copywriting and cheating on uni exams with AI software, I wonder whether that will actually have some sort of implication around tailoring things to people, personalising things, whether you sometimes end up with, in the old days of pirate radio where it was, offshore somewhere, the signals are all blurred now and you pretty much can listen to anything anywhere. I think maybe the AI might actually somehow come into play, whether that's maybe not needing to pay as much for those very expensive radio announcers. Potentially, 10 years from now, there might actually be a little machine doing that for us.
Well, we should have a reunion in 10 years' time and see where we're at with it. Dave, what do you think is going to happen in the future?
I think the thing that's really interesting to me is the uptake of voice tech. And as we've kind of talked about, the prevalence of things like Echoes and Google Homes in the home, and the ability to that then be integrated natively into things like the car environment. So the opportunity to hear an ad and then say to your Google Assistant, can you give me more information about that? And when you get home, there's an email with more detail about that. The opportunity through voice to open up channels like audio commerce, where you can be presented an ad and you can say, yeah, I'd like to buy that when I get home. And all of a sudden the opportunity is in front of you to do that. So I think it becomes a lot more interactive in that front, the opportunity through digital channels to do that, but also through the radio as well. And the possibility for that to happen is already here with voice apps that you can create yourself. And we've been working with teams to do things like that and experiment with it just to learn for ourselves. And I think that as that technology becomes more accessible, as it becomes cheaper, and it's just going to kind of turn into something that's really interesting, a bit more two-way and a bit more conversational.
Amazing.
Can I just also add, one of the biggest evolutions that it's going to be taking place for radio this year is the new measurement system that's going to come into play, so Radio 360. So that is the biggest change that the radio industry has ever put into the market since its inception, which was so many years ago. The difference will be that the new measurement system will take into consideration the logs from the actual stations, so the streaming data, the portable people meter, which is actually the watch data. So that would be listening to people's behaviours in terms of what stations they're listening to, how they're listening to them, and also the diary, which is now moving to 100% online diaries. So with that, the benefit for advertisers is that we'll have more of a granular view on really the streaming audiences, because they've already got the granular view on the broadcast audience. And there'll also be some additional data that will be available from the watch data. So what sort of habits they're up to. So that's more of a phase 2. But the evolution of the measurement system will really provide more granular insights into radio audiences.
Amazing. Guys, does anyone have any tips on scheduling and how do you build out a campaign and processes? Lisa, I might start with you.
A couple of things. One is to almost put yourself in the position of the listener. So it's very easy to jump down the path of briefing out, particularly radio stations and podcast and streaming as well, where you say, I'll just go with one channel or I'll just go with one particular network because I'm going to get a better deal. The reality of radio is unless you're going across all of those different options, you're not building the necessary reach to actually have any type of successful campaign. So I would say people need to think about collecting people in clusters, going across multiple channels in the one market and going across, as we talked about, specific times of day, specific areas where you'll have a little bit better cut through. And to do that first before then going into the negotiation with each of the media reps around how much you're going to pay for a particular package, because otherwise it becomes a little bit all-encompassing. I would say it's changed a lot over the last 20 years, but radio had at one point been a very highly commission-based industry where the reps were paid very high commission tallies, and that would mean it would be quite an aggressive negotiation if someone was missing out, if you were literally removing someone's weekly budget. So I'd say stick to what you're trying to do, stick to the audience, and the rest is quite logical. Allow it to play out and leave yourself enough time to actually have options and look at different things.
Great advice. Sarah?
Yeah, I think I'm going back to the point I made earlier. Use a tool to plan your reach and frequency across different platforms. So whether you have Roy Morgan or Nielsen, look at who you're trying to target and where they actually consume audio and that index. So if you're trying to target regional communities, then actually the power of local regional radio really is quite strong, which can be supplemented and the reach uplift provided by digital audio versus if you're trying to target a much wider demographic and perhaps a younger audience, you might then choose a different angle. So using those tools to really help you plan your channels and platforms and then speak to the local providers and publishers to see what's available, to check out what shows and what content they've got coming up. If there's a new series of a particular podcast coming up that aligns with your audience, make sure you're in there. What could you do tactically with them? How could you help, be a launch partner, for example? Talk to your media owners and understand what's going on to then help plan your campaigns.
Joe?
Oh, gosh, there's some really good ones that's already been said. Where do I go from there? I was going to talk about really a key thing to do. Definitely do your runs. Do your audience, know your audience inside and out where they're listening to radio or to audio. I would definitely support the talking to your network reps. If you're looking for ideas, like if you want to really sort of make a big splash in the radio market, the networks will have all the ideas. They'll know the talent, they'll know what's worked in the past, and they'll be able to brainstorm with you to come up with something that's going to be really integrated if that's what you're looking for, or recommend more of a spot schedule. So really discuss what they've had experience in terms of what works best on their network. So, yeah.
Can I just add on one thing to that exact point? Traditionally, radio, people think of it in clumps of 30-second spots. So it'll be a package and a media rep may say to you, oh, let's do breakfast, morning, afternoon and drive, 30 spots a week. Think that through. 30 spots on one station across 7 days, across 4 audience sessions is not a lot of spots. So I would be bringing it back down to a more granular level that says, I don't want to buy a package. I actually want to buy a schedule.
Yeah.
I want to think about it like you would television. I want to think about the environment I'm in and have I got 4 ads running in a 4-hour session, because that's, only one spot an hour. That's not a lot. And people are coming in and out of radio for probably 15, 20-minute intervals. You need to think about that when you're planning it.
Dave, thoughts and tips on schedules?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is to build on everything that's been said, is understanding the context and the environment in which people are listening. So your audience, we all do the pre-work on that. Reps know their audience, so it's coming together and working out how you can find alignment there. But then, as was mentioned just now, it's the context in which people are listening. If you've got a heavy radio listener, it might well be a really high concentration on their commute to and from work, knowing the context in which they're listening. It might well be, people who have it on in their office in the background, but it's a really passive engagement because they're not actually listening at all. So really trying to understand from the audience perspective is how they're engaging and where they're engaging and where are we going to get the most bang for buck to really cut through and get attention and get noticed.
And I think as well, like on that, it's the relationship you have with the reps that is so important, because you'll get the best insights and they know their product better than anyone else. Look, finally, for everyone, and wrapping things up into this really insightful discussion about audio, what are the best career tips that you can tell our listeners about? Lisa, I'll start with you.
This is probably across media in general, maybe not specific to just audio, but be curious, be involved, ask questions, be part of the wonderful industry we actually work in. And there is a big cross section of people. There's an amazing young, old, wise, new, lots of different clusters of humans coming together. Enjoy it. I think if anything, we risk in the next couple of years, or have risked even in the last 5 years, that it's become a very methodical, analysis-driven numbers thing. And we've got to come back to we're dealing with people and we're communicating. So have fun.
Wise words. I think we do have to have fun. I often say that. Sarah?
Mine's not in relation to audio either, so I just thought it was a general question. I'd echo what you just said. So my advice would be say yes and ask questions to everything. So go to that meeting you've been invited to, but listen and ask questions, participate in meetings. Don't sit back and be quiet and don't think you don't have a voice just because you're junior. I guarantee if you ask a question, someone else is actually thinking of asking the same question but doesn't dare. So definitely speak up. And for my best advice in this, I guess, world that we're in terms of hybrid and Zoom is turn the mute off. Don't go on mute. There's no mute button in real life, so don't mute yourself on Zoom because it stifles any kind of natural conversation. It's my biggest bugbear.
And keep your camera on.
Keep your camera on. There's no camera off in real life either, and there's no mute button in real life. So camera on, off mute, speak, be present as if you were in a real meeting because, yes, it's on Zoom, it's behind a screen, but it's still a real meeting. It's the real world, and you'll miss out if you don't.
Really good.
Yeah. Look, mine is quite similar, echoing, be curious, keep learning. Knowledge is power. So the more you know, the more that you will progress. And the other tip I would have is perseverance. If things seem a bit repetitive and it's a bit mundane, persevere. We've all done it. No matter what you do, there's always going to be a mundane part of the job. So just know that the more you put into the job, the more you're getting out of it. So that would be my top tip.
Amazing. Dave?
I think for me, it's being honest enough with yourself to know what you don't know and then being conscious enough to find out the answers, ask people. And a big part of that comes, I think, is cross-pollination, is not just sticking to your pocket of the office, working on the briefs that you're given, but walking around and picking up a brief from someone else's desk and asking what they're working on and finding out how they approach it. And it might be a completely different area to what you're in, but I guarantee you'll learn something and you'll be able to apply it next time you get a brief.
You've got to be in the office to do that.
Too true.
Well done, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Dave, Joe, Sarah, Lisa, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for tuning in, listeners.
Oh, you're welcome.
A huge thank you to our guests today, Joe Dick from CRA, Sarah Melrose from Abmatic, Lisa Christie from Pearman, and David Mooney from BCM. Thank you so much for listening.